Welcome back to the show. We're debating issues of the day with Jim Byrne Jr. and Lenny McAllister. Why don't we get right back to them? We just talked about same-sex marriage. Very, very good debate. Let's revisit Baltimore, more particularly, Lenny. Let me come to you on this. Again, forgive the phrase, 30,000 feet. It seemingly was always the phrase that worked. Peaceful protests, okay. Turn to violent, not okay. I heard a lot of that in Baltimore this week, including from the community, from ministers and others, political leaders and so forth. And then we saw it go violent. I saw a community leader the other evening hedge on that. Now, the absolute of peaceful okay, violent not okay, seems to be giving away if you go with this perspective, which was, I don't condone what they did, but I understand it. That makes it, that's a hedge.
That's not a hedge. That's an explanation. It's not a hedge. It's an explanation. It's understanding that you're talking about people that have been locked in generational poverty. You're talking about people that have not been able to access political power, have not been able to access civic power. They've been locked out of jobs. They've been locked out of educational equality. They have not been able to climb out of the situations they find themselves in. So it's an explanation as to what transpired. Now, is it a justification? Are we saying that, no, you should be allowed to do these things, or no, don't blame them, they have every right to do that? No, we're not saying that at all. But are we saying, why are these things transpiring? If you look at the conditions from Baltimore to Pittsburgh to New York City to Los Angeles and points in between, you can understand why more and more African-American communities become absolutely frustrated with what's transpiring in an era where you have the first African-American president, you have an African-American mayor of Baltimore, you have an African-American governor of Massachusetts, etc. You see black representation in government, but you still continue to see these type of horrible socioeconomic conditions that African-Americans are suffering under, and one of the symptoms of that is going through these types of police controversies, and I'll call it controversies. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, even though the pattern over the last several years seems to shed light elsewhere. Okay, very interesting. I want to get back to one of the latter points. Do you buy what he just said, Jim? I mean, it sounds to me, whether we parse words or we use it, he's not saying they have a right, but he understands it and it's an explanation. That's about as close to right as you could get.
No, I don't think that's what Lenny said, and I don't think what was said down in Baltimore. I think Lenny nailed it. That was an articulate explanation of the situation, and I couldn't agree with what Lenny said more. The bottom line is stepping back and figuring out a solution. And I do agree that as we go into the 2016 presidential cycle and we have candidates on both sides, this conversation has to be had. This conversation has to be had in a civil fashion. Neither side, and I've seen a little bit of the sniping in the Beltway already, shame on both sides. This is not a Democrat problem, a Republican problem, it's a bipartisan problem.
Jim, I agree with you. I think you're right. It's an American issue.
Absolutely.
At the very least, it's an American issue. And I'm giving benefit of the doubt rather than saying problem or what have you. But it's certainly something that, in my mind, Lenny, requires something I don't know if we have the courage to do right now. Even the ability to do. We are so polarized that I can't imagine that we could even get people around the table to have like the international treaty conversation necessary here.
I disagree with you 100%, Ellis, and you know I love you dearly, but I do think that with the right type of leadership into place, the right type of focus, in bringing servant leaders into office, in bringing servant leaders into positions of power, that we will have the opportunity to heal our land, heal our cities, and start moving forward. However, we do have to look at how we've been doing things over the last several decades. Who are we voting into office? What policies are we putting into place? How are we trying to approach the problems that we have, and are they being resolved? The answer, unfortunately, has been rather consistent, and there's going to have to be some soul searching, and I know President Obama said this, but I concur with him. It's going to take some soul searching, not just on how police interact with African-American communities, but how African-American communities invest and engage their citizenship and how they move forward, starting with the voting patterns in 2016, how they hold their elected officials accountable, and the like.
Okay, well, that's a point maybe a lot of people need I'll be perfectly blunt, maybe a lot of people haven't heard and need to hear. Jim, if I'm hearing it, he's saying that there is a problem. We all know the tentacles. We all know the explanations and the reasons, and they go beyond just one simple incident. But what he is suggesting, if I hear him correctly, is to say that it needs to, if not start within the community, there has to be self-responsibility within the community.
That's part of what Lenny said. That's part of what the president said. That's part of what servant leaders, and that is a great buzz phrase. What servant leaders, people who realize that they're there to serve and not vice versa, have said as well. That's where the solution comes.
What gives us the confidence in that, Jim? Come on, they can't make a budget on time. They can't agree on what day of the week is. They've hated the president from the moment he walked through the front door. Arguably, he's not been very good.
Let's not put this at the federal level. The bottom line is, if you look at the elected officials where these things are transpiring, they're happening at the local and county level. And then on top of that, and Jim, I hate to be the bearer of bad news and break this to you, but by and large, every single major metropolitan area is not just run by Democrats, it's been dominated by Democrats. So this is something
that is so unfortunate.
It is in regards to the lack of political competition.
So now it's the Democrats' fault. I'm not going to snipe with Republicans. I'm going to stick to what I said. There needs to be a bipartisan solution here.
And we don't have that in cities, though, Jim. That's what I'm saying.
I agree with the words of both of you in many, many ways, except I'll take issue with Lenny. I said this last night. Hillary Clinton said yesterday things.
I'd like to respond to that, too.
Go ahead, Jim.
Of course you can. But Hillary Clinton talked in terms of leadership and in effect from the top down. And that's, I think this can't be a czar. This can't be somebody who gives it to some, task force. It's got to be a mission of somebody, whether we call him a president, politician, or a civil servant turned politician, whatever Lenny just said. Guys, go ahead.
Give the Democratic leadership in those urban areas where we're having this problem some of the federal programs that your Republican pals cut, and maybe we can start to make some changes. If you want to play that game, Lenny, we'll play.
Well, I'm not trying to play the game. I'm just saying let's look at the voting patterns of African Americans.
Let's look at
and heck, we can talk. You want to talk about cuts, Jim? Let's talk about the programs that President Obama cut when it came to historically black colleges and universities, both in 2009 as well as in 2013. Let's talk about the DC voucher program that President Obama cut in 2009 as well as in 2011. So if you want to talk about cuts, let's not necessarily make it seem as though Republicans, who by the way put both of those programs back into place, that they're just the automatic villains. What I'm saying is, when you have a one-party system in most cities throughout America, you're not getting the political competition and the competition of ideas that people need in order to make the tough changes that are necessary to make America truly great in our urban environments. And Lenny, that's going to take a different type of choice.
Lenny, I'm up against it, but I do have to seek one clarification. Jim, please. It was earlier you said something. Did you say that most of these elected officials in the areas in question around Baltimore are African American or Democrat?
I believe Lenny said that they were Democrat.
And many of them are African American.
Okay. So it's happened on their watch.
There you go.
Look, again, you're cutting out what I said. A lot of this problem came from the federal level down. Some programs were cut. Some are working, some are not.
Right.
Okay, but you have to come to the common ground. I do not think that we need to be playing the partisan blame game here. This is a systemic problem that is going across the nation right now. We need to fix it without doing a lot of this.
Well, Jim Burton Jr., thank you. We've got to wrap it there, guys. Chairman of the PA Democratic Party, and of course Lenny, the host of the Lenny McAllister Show, Newsradio 1020 KDKA, and also here on Friday nights. We get to the point. I got to come back and talk about the Attorney General of the United States. Man, is she in a mess. Let's see if she could fix it. I'll tell you what the mess is in 2 minutes.